Hello everyone. If you like this audiobook and want to listen to more, please consider subscribing. And if you like this video, like it as well, that it enjoy.
Cave hideout. Now they can look forward to clocking out early today, so they were very happy the alien left. Had it stayed, they would have to go into overtime monitoring the situation. Donald exhaled and rubbed the back of his neck. Well, that was something. Cecil didn't respond. He was still staring at the screen with a stern face. Something about it didn't sit right. This was too deliberate and swift. He could only imagine what this thing came for. Sigh, one step at a time, Cecil, he muttered under his breath. Donald glanced at him. Sir. Cecil shook his head slightly. Nothing, just a feeling. As always. Miles away, in a quiet suburban home, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Nolan Grayson sat at the table, relaxed, a plate of food in front of him. Debbie sat nearby, gently rocking their 6-month-old son in her arms. Mark cooed softly, small hands moving aimlessly as he stared up at the ceiling. Looks like someone's getting stronger already, Nolan said with a faint smile, watching his son. Debbie laughed lightly saying, he's 6 months old, Nolan. Still, Nolan replied, taking another bite of the sushi his wife made, you never know, he might one day become like his dad, strong and sexy. Ha ha ha, stop Nolan. Boom. A distant shockwave rippled through the air in the distance. It wasn't loud enough to shatter anything nearby or cause a severe disturbance, but it was strong enough to be noticed by those around as car alarms started going off. Nolan's hand paused mid-motion, his eyes shifted slightly, gaze lifting toward the direction of the sound. Debbie looked up. What was that? Nolan didn't answer her immediately. Instead, he stood up and stepped outside instantly, which caused the surroundings to generate a gush of wind with how fast he moved. The sky stretched endlessly above him, quiet and clear with nothing but the cosmos looking back. For a brief moment, there was nothing in sight, the view of the sky was mesmerizing. But looking further around, he saw a tiny figure in the distance. It was barely visible, shooting upward at an absurd speed, tearing through the atmosphere as if it wasn't even there. Nolan narrowed his eyes slightly as he watched it for another second, making sure this thing was actually leaving. He stood there a moment longer, considering what it was as he folded his arm. At the end of the day, as long as it didn't threaten the immediate planet, he could only shake his head. One fact was prevalent. It was faster than most beings, even Red Rush, which he didn't like because he only knew one other species that was that fast. Nolan exhaled quietly. Probably nothing, he muttered. With that, he turned and walked back and flew back into the house. Debbie looked at him expectantly, saying, well. He sat down and picked up his fork again. Just a sonic disturbance. Nothing to worry about, honey. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. If you're sure. I am, Nolan said dismissively. Mark let out a small sound, drawing both their attention. Easing the tension, they were immediately reminded of their child, who brought them both joy. Nolan looked at his son again, his expression softening slightly. Harold descended through the thin atmosphere of a distant, nameless planet, his speed slowing as the barren terrain came into view. There was nothing here, no signs of life, no structures or even movement. Just endless rock and silence stretching across the horizon. This location was perfect for his future plans whilst he continues his adventures in the galaxy. He landed just outside a concealed cave that had a cloaking feature that made it invisible to the normal eye, the same one he had prepared long before this day ever came. He spent weeks renovating the inside of the cave to something of his liking. With a light push, he shifted the boulder covering the entrance and stepped inside, the dim interior lighting up as the systems recognized his presence. In his arms, the baby stirred slightly. He glanced down at her, his expression unreadable for a moment. Adam Eve, he muttered under his breath. Then he walked deeper into the cave as he clicked on a hidden lever and another pattern recognition device that revealed stairs going underground. Everything was already set up, organized. Supplies lined one side, equipment on another, and at the center was the device he had spent time preparing, an incubation cradle, advanced enough to sustain and nurture a child without constant supervision. He had planned this along with many other things since he had over 900 years. So with that much time, it would be a crime not to be ready for anything. Every detail was accounted for. Still, as he picked up a bottle of milk and carefully adjusted it before bringing it to her mouth. Something about the situation felt off. He watched her latch onto it instinctively, small hands moving weakly as she fed. Harold let out a quiet breath through his nose. "This is strange," he admitted. A faint chuckle escaped him. Here he was, someone who had slaughtered countless beings, endured centuries of conquest, and now he was holding a fragile infant, making sure she was fed properly. However, it was a foreign notion just yet. He didn't mind taking care of a baby. Heck, he would even take care of a rat as long as it became op in the future. He adjusted his grip slightly with trained practice, making sure her head was supported. He had also prepared to tenderly hold a baby so it's comfortable. "Never thought I'd be doing this in this lifetime, but there was no other option. You can't indoctrinate and manipulate a grown-ass teenager that already loves her life. I should start the brainwashing while she's still young," he said, almost to himself. The baby made a soft sound, completely unaware of anything beyond the warmth in the milk. Harold watched her for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then his expression shifted as he smiled, saying, "This isn't charity, though, little one." Stacking trump cards, he continued quietly. "You're an investment, my trump card, my hidden superweapon, but that's if I can push your limits till you unlock your full abilities. Should I also kidnap Monster Girl, too? She could act as my own personal Hulk, but she would have to regress significantly in age to be strong enough for my liking. There's a baby version of her in another timeline that the Viltrumites used to destroy cities. I could use that version of her instead of kidnapping the current one here. Once that's complete, I'll have two powerful weapons under my control once I go to Marvel or DC. Wait, what will I even do when I get there? I could search for the Infinity Gauntlet and find the stones before Thanos does. Heck, why don't I just let him collect them for me, then use Adam Eve to trap him in place whilst I grab it? Then I'll immediately leave the universe. I don't want to stay and attract the wrath of certain beings. I could head to DC and lay low. Nobody will oppose me there because they don't know anything about the Infinity Stones. Not even Superman can stop me." Once she finished, he pulled the bottle away and wiped her mouth with a piece of cloth. Without hesitation, he walked over to the cradle and placed her inside. The system activated immediately when it scanned the baby with a green laser light. Soft light surrounded her as the mechanisms adjusted, monitoring her vitals, regulating temperature, and ensuring stability. The cradle hummed quietly, self-sustaining and reliable exactly as intended. Harold stepped back slightly, observing and making sure everything was in place. He couldn't afford any slip-up right now, so everything had to be in place before he ventured out. Everything was functioning properly, which made him nod in approval while he turned away. There was no reason to linger anymore, as a lot had to be done now going forward, and he still needed to complete the time trial, as one day had already passed, leaving him with 6 days left. As he walked toward the cave entrance, he paused saying, "I'll turn you into something far greater than what you would have become," he said, his voice low as he gave the cradle one last look of happiness. Only the quiet hum of the cradle responded to his statement of ambition. He didn't mind, because time was on his side, and he had plenty of it. At the entrance, he stepped outside and grabbed the massive boulder, dragging it back into place until the cave was completely sealed once more. Not that it truly mattered. This planet sat at the edge of the galaxy, isolated and forgotten. No one would stumble across it by accident. Still, precautions were necessary so as not to come to regret his decisions in the future. After all, there have been hidden secrets, yet someone, for some lucky reason, can unveil everything. He dusted his hands off lightly and looked up at the sky. Without another thought, he shot upward into space, his body cutting through the atmosphere with ease. The vacuum welcomed him as he accelerated, his trajectory already set. "Battle Beast, here I come, you're mine now." His eyes narrowed slightly as the image of the reward flashed through his mind again. The outcome was worth the risk, and worth the trouble too, but he was confident in his abilities to subdue him. After all, he wasn't a pushover right now, he was stronger than ever before. He defeated Conquest at a younger age, he killed dozens of Ragnars using wit and strategy instead of brute force, and he defeated a physically stronger opponent by exploiting their weakness. So yeah, he wasn't someone to be underestimated, at least that's what he thought. At his side, secured in a holster he made himself, rested the weapon he had taken from Space Racer, the Infinity Ray. Even without touching it, he could feel the connection, faint but ever present. With this weapon on top of my strength and speed, I'll be a solar-level threat at this point, and who said Viltrumites can't use guns? Such a shame my kind is so prideful and has big egos. Had they weaponized their own weakness, Viltrumites would have been unstoppable long ago. I show them a combination they never thought possible. This tool that now in his possession, allowed him to become efficient from a ranged distance whilst not getting close and personal. He knew a few beings this would be useful against. Harold increased his speed. As for finding his opponent, he already placed a tracker a while ago on his ship at the space market where Battle Beast buys weapons. So that was his wrist had a device that beeped constantly like a signal. Battle Beast sat within his ship, one hand resting near the controls as the vessel cut through space at a steady pace. The route was already set, his destination being a distant space market where he could resupply and perhaps find something of interest. Or someone. The silence inside the ship didn't bother him. If anything, it was welcome. His kind did not crave noise, they craved conflict, but he was craving a bloodbath, one of the few things that made him stand out. Still, it had been too long since he had faced something worth his time. He exhaled slowly in boredom, his frustration grew with every enemy he slaughters simply because they couldn't match his prowess, even when they did, they couldn't keep up with him for too long. Then a sudden impact shook the ship. The engine sputtered violently, sparks flying across the console as warning signals flashed red across his interface. Battle Beast's eyes narrowed at this turn of events. Who dared attack him while he's on his way to somewhere important? Hopefully, it was someone who could back this amount of bravery, at least that's what he told himself. He rose from his seat without urgency like a calm beast. It's almost as if he didn't care about the fact that he might get stuck here, but there was a shift in his presence. Something had struck his engines, hard enough to disrupt flight mid-trajectory. That alone was interesting enough since he wanted to tear whoever did that in half. He stepped forward, looking out through the main viewport. And then he saw him, a Viltrumite, hovering just ahead of the ship, completely still, as if he had been waiting with arms folded behind. Battle Beast's expression didn't change at first due to surprise, but then slowly, his lips curled upward. What luck, it seems I've been blessed today. The Viltrumite said nothing back. Instead, he raised his hand and pointed toward a nearby planet as if signaling him to go there. The planet was silent, barren, and close enough to serve as a battlefield. Battle Beast stared for a moment longer, studying this Viltrumite. Most Viltrumites that he had fought were always weak, some did put up a good fight, but not for long until their skulls were crushed by his fangs. Then he licked his lips, saying, I see. Without hesitation, he turned back to the controls and redirected the ship for an emergency landing. He didn't even question what the Viltrumite wanted, and he pointed at the planet. He just followed along, hoping for something worthy of his time. And if it wasn't, then he will just eat the Viltrumite for breakfast, as that was another reason why he was heading to the market. The damaged engines roared in protest, but he forced the descent anyway, guiding the vessel straight toward the planet's surface. He didn't bother landing properly. There was no need to, as it wouldn't change anything. He could always buy a new ship, the only problem would be getting of the planet. The ship tore through the atmosphere and slammed into the ground with violent force, a shockwave rippling outward as debris scattered in every direction. It skidded on the ground for a few meters, creating a large muddy trench because of the fuel leakage and the soil below. Silence followed as if something bad had happened, but the wreckage shifted slightly a few seconds later, then a section of the ship burst open with enough force to send it flying. From within the broken hull, Battle Beast stepped out, completely unscathed, not even dust was visible on his white fur. In one hand, he held his sword and in the other, his mace. His gaze locked forward, scanning the area before eventually landing on a figure levitating. Harold stood in the distance watching. He patiently waited for Battle Beast to come a bit closer. Seeing in person like this compared to the comics, I can't describe the feeling. But he does look menacing, especially since I know what he's capable of. Harold thought as he too moved closer but stayed 5 meters away so he doesn't get caught off guard with a sudden strike. The wind howled faintly across the barren land between them. Harold didn't move much, he didn't even prepare a stance or speak first. This was perceived as typical Viltrumite pride by Battle Beast. What do we have here? Are you here to challenge me? Battle Beast asked the obvious question, but deep down he knew the answer. I heard you have been searching the galaxy for a worthy opponent. Today is your lucky day. Since you're so eager for a worthy opponent, Harold said, his tone calm, almost casual, here I am. Harold spread his arms out as if welcoming something. Battle Beast looked at Harold, For a brief moment, he said nothing, studying him thoroughly. He wanted to understand what inspired this courage to personally find him. The Viltrumites were too busy subjugating planets and enforcing slave worlds. Why was this Viltrumite here seeking death? Then a low sound escaped him akin to a growl. A Viltrumite who wants to die at my hands, he muttered. His grip tightened around his weapons as he raised his mace, pointing at Harold in a commanding manner, saying, I have slain your kind before. What makes you so different? His tone didn't carry any arrogance. He genuinely wanted to know why Harold was confident in himself, or why he even bothered going through the trouble of fighting him. Harold didn't respond verbally. He only thought to himself, let me show you pussycat. Fighting Battle Beast 2. Without another word, he disappeared from his original position in an instant. At least to the normal person it looked instant, as if he was light itself. He moved so fast that the air created a temporary suction, but this wasn't his top speed. In fact, this was only 20%. The previous him that had not yet fought Juggernaut would have to use 45% speed to move this fast. So one can imagine, he has come really far in strength and speed being his main advantage. Battle Beast's eyes sharpened instantly. Boom! Harold reappeared directly in front of him, his fist already driving forward with full force. The punch connected cleanly with Battle Beast's face, the impact releasing a violent shockwave that tore through the ground beneath them, ripping it into chunks. This leveled an area of around 3 kilometers as the ground was now chunks of rocks. Dust exploded upward as if a bomb had gone off. Battle Beast's head snapped to the side as his jaw snapped, but Harold grabbed his other arm so he doesn't fly away because of his punch. Harold then threw another punch, making sure Battle Beast was held in place with his grip. Then he used his knee and drove it directly into Battle Beast's face head-on, which made Battle Beast clench his face as it wrinkled. This time, he let Battle Beast go by releasing his arm, so Battle Beast flew back 20 kilometers into the distance, while Harold followed with giving him a break. All this happened within 0.032 seconds, so to a normal looker, one moment they were staring at each other, and then the next, they disappeared into the distance as if they teleported. As Battle Beast fell from the sky in an arc, Harold punched him in the gut mid-air to speed up the process. This shot Battle Beast into the earth, submerging him as the ground caved in. Harold folded his arms as he watched below in disdain. 4 seconds later, Battle Beast crawled out of the ground he was submerged in. Harold's eyes narrowed as his opponent chest-beated himself like a gorilla. Good, finally, someone who can make me feel hurt, make me go all out. Battle Beast sighed as he punched his fists together. He then lifted his sword and mace as their gazes met like two fierce predators that wanted to tear each other apart and eat the remains. Battle Beast grinned as he prepared to attack. A wide, feral grin that showcased his sharp fangs as he said, "This battle will be legendary, I can feel it in my bones." He leapt into the air and swung his sword at Harold. The mace tore through the air toward Harold's side with terrifying speed he didn't expect. Harold reacted instantly, pulling back just enough for the weapon to graze past him instead of crushing him entirely. The force of the swing alone split the ground below his position. He didn't retreat far but just enough, landing back on the ground for a proper engagement. Then he attacked again, closing the gap, aiming for another punch to Battle Beast's face, so he cocked his fist back and aimed to strike Battle Beast when he landed back on the ground. Battle Beast was this and threw his sword at him, which he dodged and continued moving in for the strike, but Battle Beast countered with a swing of his mace at Harold's fist, aiming to shatter his hand. The mace and fist collided. Steel rang out against flesh, the impact sending another shockwave across the battlefield. The air was so concentrated that it sliced through the earth with each shockwave giving the battlefield scars. Harold ducked under the next swing, shifting his position slightly to the side before driving a punch toward Battle Beast's ribs. He coupled that punch with another to the fist and followed that 1-2 with a 2-piece jab combo to Battle Beast's face. But on the last punch, something unexpected happened. Battle Beast opened his mouth as Harold's fist was about to strike him square. His fist entered the beast's mouth and he bit down, crushing it immediately. Harold didn't scream in pain. In fact, it looked like he didn't feel anything. As Battle Beast gnawed at his hand caught in his mouth, he went for a punch with the other hand, but Battle Beast caught that 1-2 and forcefully snapped his hand, making the bone stick out. To escape the situation, Harold headbutted Battle Beast with enough force to send him skidding on his back for meters deep with the earth creating a trench. His other look someone crunched it like paper while his other hand was witted in a wrong was as a bone was sticking out, but this didn't bother him as his new regeneration ability took effect immediately. As expected of this wild beast. If I was an ordinary Viltrumite, I would have ran away right now. 7 seconds later his wound had healed completely. During those seconds he was too busy dodging Battle Beast's attacks using his instincts and insane speed. He could have countered with his own attack, but he had a feeling that's what Battle Beast wanted. Battle Beast brought his knee upward, immediately aiming for his jaw, forcing Harold to disengage mid-motion as he was trying to counterattack. The moment he created distance, the mace came flying at him as Battle Beast had thrown it at him. Harold leaned back just enough to avoid it, the weapon passing inches from his face, but he grasped the handle of the weapon and threw it back at Battle Beast with enough force to shatter the earth below in a violent shockwave. Since he threw it very hard and fast, Battle Beast couldn't dodge, so he decided to tank it. He grabbed it, but since the force was too strong, it lifted him off his feet and sent him flying along with it. Battle Beast then buried his claws into the earth to stop his momentum, then he got on all fours and began sprinting towards Harold like a wild beast. Harold used his favorite technique and clasped his hands hard enough to create a shockwave attack that rippled through the earth, dissecting it into blocks and debris. Still, Battle Beast continued using the scattered debris as leverage to jump on. Harold met him head-on as he cocked a punch, while Battle Beast did the same. Fighting Battle Beast 3. The clash didn't slow down. If anything, it escalated. Harold adjusted his stance mid-air, his breathing controlled but heavier than before, his body already showing signs of strain. His strength and speed were no laughing matter. He was also knowledgeable on how to use his strengths best compared to his weaknesses. Battle Beast wasn't the type of opponent you overwhelmed, though. He adapted to Harold's strategies, making it so that he could repeat the same move twice, forcing Harold to adapt too. As the fight continued, he was learning more and more about his flaws in combat technique and what he should do better next time. But this wasn't one-sided. Battle Beast 2 was learning from his mistakes, and countering with better form. The only problem was Harold kept regenerating from his non-fatal wounds, which at first surprised Battle Beast because he's never seen this before on a Viltrumite, but nonetheless he didn't bother investigating why. He accepted the challenge and decided to keep pouncing on Harold, but he would be lying if he said he wasn't enjoying this. In fact, each second that went by, he became even more excited and wild, slowly going all out like the beast he truly is. Nobody else could bring out this side of him, because at most they would die before he goes all out, but he thanked Harold for making him reveal his true self and power. This made him embrace the beast in him as he clawed at Harold and used his fangs to bite down on him. I have to stay unpredictable. One mistake and hell chew on me with those teeth, but still, I'm excited for some reason. Is it because I'll grow stronger or because I might die? That was the only way out of this, death or strength beyond all means. There was no other option. That laid the foundation of his conviction going forward. He came at the beast again with a curved approach, changing angles mid-flight, accelerating and decelerating in bursts to throw off timing. His fist came from below, aimed at Battle Beast's jaw, but the response was immediate. Battle Beast tilted his head just enough for the strike to graze instead of landing clean. At the same time, his mace swung upward in a brutal arc. Harold twisted his body, barely avoiding a direct hit as the weapon scraped across his side, tearing through his uniform and skin. Had that attack hit him, his jaw would have shattered, which would have hurt so bad. But pain wasn't in his system anymore. It was present, but he simply ignored it as if it's not there. He countered with a knee to the ribs, which connected as a dull impact that echoed as Battle Beast's body shifted slightly backward. One could hear slight bone cracks as fragments of the bones by the ribs fell out and punctured Battle Beast's lungs. This made Battle cough up blood, but he licked the blood on his lips right after with a grin. Harold clicked his tongue internally as he pushed off, creating distance. This cat has thick skin. However, I didn't use all my strength in that attack, simply because I was aiming to cripple, not send him flying. Battle Beast rolled his shoulder once, as if loosening it, then stepped forward again with a growl of a lion. They collided again, exchanging blows. It was Hunslety, a battle of attrition as no one was above the other. Actually, it was a battle of attrition for Harold because, while he was injured he healed seconds later, but Battle Beast remained with his wound. He thanked his system for this because it gave him the means to attain such an advantage over individuals. Shockwaves erupted with each exchange, the ground beneath them cracking further, splitting apart under the constant pressure. Harold dipped low, avoiding a horizontal slash before driving forward with a barrage of punches. He threw jab combos coupled with swings. They were fast, precise, each aimed at a vital point. Before he disengaged, he would throw Fury punks where he punched Battle Beast in the abdomen 100 times in less than 0.20 seconds. It almost looked like he was a speedster throwing rapid punches. Battle Beast tanked some while blocking the others by biting down and gnawing on his arm and hand. This was more efficient than just blocking only, as that would give Harold time to recover, and Battle Beast didn't want that. So instead of blocking certain attacks, he used his mouth to block by biting the limb. A clawed hand shot forward, catching Harold across the face, the claws digging deep inside his flesh as Battle Beast tore his face. He even made sure to slowly drag his claws across his face, creating large scar wounds that were very deep. It honestly looked messed up, even though it was slowly healing. Crack! Harold's head snapped to the side, his vision blurring in red. Blood was cascading against his swollen eye, that's why his left eye could only see red. Using the momentum, he spun and delivered a backhand strike out of anger, directly to Battle Beast's temple. The backhand was enforced by his full strength, so it was no surprise that Battle Beast was sent flying like a rocket into the distance. If they were on Earth, Battle Beast basically flew across the Pacific Ocean, that's how far he was sent flying. Battle Beast fell on the ground and bounced a couple of times as an inflated ball across a vast distance. After that he skidded back a few meters, his claws digging into the ground to stabilize himself. Harold held his face as it felt like it was on fire, but it was simply the pain of deep scars 6 inches long and 1 centimeter wide. Blood dripped steadily from Harold's face, one eye already swelling shut. His breathing was controlled, but his body was taking damage. His side was torn from another previous claw attack. The tear revealed his bones and muscles beneath his skin as they were clear as day. 1,200 kilometers away from him, Battle Beast stood with one eye ruined as Harold tried to gouge them out, blood trailing down his face. Harold also used his finisher move of clenching his fingers into a blade, which is why there was a deep slash cut across Battle Beast's chest, exposing flesh beneath. Right now, they breathed heavily as they stood far from each other, but Harold roared like a maniac and shot it into the air with a sonic boom. He then flew to Battle Beast's position. He didn't want the beast to catch its breath, but that meant he wouldn't either, not that it mattered because he wasn't tired. He was flying so fast that the atmosphere ignited around him, creating a fireball that engulfed him. Battle Beast saw him. Actually, he saw a fireball coming to him, but he knew it was the Viltrumite. Still, he growled like a lion. Good, he muttered again, voice low but filled with satisfaction as he brandished his claws. He had already ditched his weapons at this point, as this was a battle worthy of his true self. 7 comments 0 vote. When gods clash. Far away, within the Viltrumite command structure, the atmosphere was far less controlled. Thragg stood at the center of the chamber, his presence alone enough to silence everyone present. A bunch of reports lay scattered in front of him as he went through. His frustration grew with each second, even the way his fists tightened was evidence of that. His jaw too tightened slightly, though his expression remained composed. Disobedience, once again, what could he possibly be up to? He said quietly, almost as if he was asking himself that question. General Craig stood nearby, along with several elite Viltrumites. None of them spoke immediately. They understood the situation for what it was. They also understood Thragg's patience had limits, limits nobody in the Empire wanted to test. He was supposed to follow my orders, Grand Regent, and enforce the worlds in his mission logs, and now he has deserted from us. He has exceeded expectations in strength, that's why we need him more than ever, Craig said carefully. Reports suggest he has surpassed standard elite Viltrumites. He is literally only second to you. Thragg's eyes shifted slightly saying, I am aware. Which is precisely why this behavior cannot continue. He spoke in a calm manner as if signing a fellow Viltrumite's death warrant wasn't something he would raise his voice over. Thragg continued, he ignores orders. Operates independently. And now, disappears without explanation. You will locate him. Craig nodded in understanding. He cleared his throat and asked, and if he resists? Thragg's gaze hardened, irritated by the question, but he didn't voice that out. Instead, he looked at Craig with a stern gaze that spoke volumes and said, capturing if possible, I want to finish him off myself. I hope I made myself clear. His wording was deliberate so they couldn't misunderstand him. They shouldn't kill him but instead restrain him, and of course, being gently wasn't part of the equation, so they could take an aggressive approach if they wanted to. Thragg folded his arms behind his back as he turned away and looked at Argyll's skull saying, do not underestimate him. If reports are accurate, he is already beyond most of you individually. Anissa and a few others exchanged brief glances. They already knew Harold was not normal ever since he killed Conquest 1,000 years ago, so they had basic knowledge of his exponential strength. So it was basically common sense not to underestimate Harold unless they had a death wish. Understood, we won't face him individually. If we come at him at once, there's a chance we might overwhelm him, Craig replied. Thragg looked behind slightly. For your own sake, don't fail me, now go. Comma 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 comma. Back on the battlefield, the planet itself had begun to suffer the brunt of this fight. Mountains in the distance cracked under the pressure of their clashes. Valleys split open as shockwaves rippled outward again and again. The air vibrated with each shockwave that rippled through. It was severe to the point where if a human stood near, they would evaporate like smoke due to compressed air and heat. The ground no longer held firmly below, as there were earthquakes everywhere, splitting the earth in various directions. These cracks in the ground fell so deep to the point where one would hit the planet's crust soon enough. Harold was mentally exhausted by physical. His body felt like he hadn't even done much. This was because of his near-infinite stamina and his regeneration ability, which he stole from Juggernaut. Blood dripped from his knuckles, from his arms, from the deep gash across his stomach that had long since begun knitting itself back together. The regeneration worked constantly now, fibers reconnecting, skin reforming, damage reversing faster than it could fully settle. Battle Beast stood across from him, though, was becoming less accurate with each passing moment. His entire upper body was torn open in multiple places, deep wounds crossing over one another until his chest looked more like a battlefield than flesh. One eye was gone, the other burning with that same relentless hunger. Right now, he was on the ground because of a tackle from Battle Beast followed by rapid punches to his face, but he blocked by bringing his guard up, which prompted Battle Beast to grab his arms and spread them apart. Battle Beast then bit down on his face, his lower fangs entering below his jaw while his upper fangs couldn't penetrate his skull. Ah! Harold screamed in anger and pain. He struggled, but the force was strong like a clamp. He even tried to punch Battle Beast in the gut, making sure to grab the exposed rib cage and forcefully rip out the bones. With the bones out of the way, he grabbed the lung and squeezed tightly. But Battle Beast didn't budge, and his skull was slowly cracking, so he decided to change his approach and used his hands to grab the beast's mouth. He was trying to pry it wide open to loosen its grip on his face. This was important because this cat was trying to bite his head off. So he used all his strength to pry the mouth open, even groaning as he did so, while Battle Beast growled. 3 seconds later, he removed his head from the mouth because the fangs weren't stuck on his face anymore. Blood gushed out from below his jaw as his windpipe could also be seen. But even though he was now free, he didn't let go of Battle Beast's mouth. Instead, he continued to open it wide open, aiming to make it spread 180 degrees. Battle Beast saw his intentions and started to claw at his abdomen constantly. But Harold didn't let go, even when tears and blood kept falling from his eyes due to the pain and trauma of this fight. He clenched his teeth and continued to open wider and wider. Cracks were sounding out, but he didn't stop even then. His intestines were being clawed at, but his resolve held him firm. One could only imagine the beast he would become once this fight was over. To prevent Battle Beast from piercing his heart, he drove his knee into the beast to stun it. Then he followed with a pivot to jump behind Battle Beast while still stretching the mouth wider open. Now that he was behind, he kicked the knee joints to force Battle Beast onto his knees. This position incapacitated the beast, making it unable to claw at him anymore. 13 comments, 0 vote, system upgrade and more. This allowed Harold's body to finally breathe as his wounds began to heal rapidly. As for Battle Beast, things weren't so good for him. He didn't have the fast regenerative abilities Harold had. That's why he was covered in fatal wounds from head to toe. In fact, he was covered in his blood and Harold's blood all over. It looked like he had just dipped himself in blood. His white fur was now red. Harold was somewhat the same, but this fight had taken a toll on them both. With Harold now at an advantage, he screamed as he exerted all his strength. Battle Beast's mouth opened wider to abnormal levels no person should. He growled as he tried to sink his claws into Harold's grip, then crack. Battle Beast's body slumped lifelessly. Harold, seeing this, let go with shaky hands. The mouth was successful, open wide enough to kill his opponent. In fact, it opened till 210 degrees. Harold sat down as his hands were shaking like a scared person. Truly, he was scared even though he won. Battle Beast's fierce nature and brutalness were something he would never forget anytime soon. 2-1, I won, he said as he huffed heavily. He repeated the words constantly as a realization settled on him, but surprisingly, the more he said it, the more he began to smile. I won, I beat Battle Beast, I beat him, hee. I fucking won, he screamed as he stood up excitedly. His previous fear had now vanished as if it wasn't there to begin with. He chuckled, saying, why am I afraid? He's dead, and I'm alive, so I should be shaking like this. I beat one of the strongest beings in the galaxy. Since he has completed the time trial just in time, especially since the battle lasted 4 days and 18 hours. He felt a massive rush of strength. It was so large that he felt like he could split this planet in half. His imaginations were going wild as he felt the power rush. He looked at his hands that stopped shaking, and clenched them as he said, truly, I've been reborn now, yes, now I'm born a god, hehehehe. Ha ha ha. Comma 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 comma. Far away, deep in space, several figures moved at high speed, their bodies cutting through the void with precision and intent. Lucan led the group, his expression firm as he followed the coordinates that had been provided. Beside him, Anissa maintained her pace, along with several other elite Viltrumites. He was last detected here, but we shouldn't get our hopes too high, he might well overgone, Lucan said, glancing ahead. Anissa narrowed her eyes slightly as she looked ahead, saying, Earth. What is so special about this place that makes him pay a visit? Isn't this Nolan's post? The blue planet came into view in the distance, calm and untouched, completely unaware of what had just transpired elsewhere or what was yet to come. He passed through it, one of the elites added. That's the last confirmed location. So we should ask Nolan if he saw him. Anissa folded her arms slightly as they slowed their approach, saying, so he's either hiding there, or moved on to a different planet. Either way, we must follow Grand Regent's orders and detain him. Lucan took in her words carefully. He wasn't the type to immediately respond without something crucial to say. His gaze remained fixed on the planet as he watched in disdain. Enough chit-chat, we must head there now, he finally said. They adjusted their trajectory descending into the planet, unaware that the one they were searching for had already finished what he set out to do, and was now far beyond where they expected him to be. Comma 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 comma. Harold didn't linger for too long after. The battlefield behind him was quiet now, completely still, as if the planet itself had finally given up after enduring 4 days of relentless destruction. Craters stretched across the surface, mountains reduced to rubble, the air thick with dust. At the center of it all, Battle Beast lay where he had fallen. Harold stood over the site for a moment longer than necessary, his breathing now steady, his body almost fully restored. The wounds that had once threatened his life were already gone, replaced by fresh skin and reinforced muscle. Every fiber in his body felt denser, more responsive, more refined. He exhaled quietly and looked down at what remained of his opponent. You earned it, he muttered. Trail complete, time trial, kill Battle Beast duration, 1 week. Rewards, 500% strength, 860% speed, 1330% endurance, combat efficiency 90%, reaction time 350%, instincts 99% increases, 2 multiplier lottery tickets, system upgrade. Using what remained of the terrain, he carved out a deep section of earth, what used to be solid ground now easily displaced under his strength. He lowered Battle Beast's body into it carefully. Once done, he covered it. He turned away and flew off the planet. His destination back home, which took him 40 minutes to get there. The cave welcomed him back in silence. The same dim lighting inside a controlled environment that he had made. At the center, the cradle continued its quiet operation. Harold walked over and stopped just beside it. Inside, the baby remained asleep. He stared for a second with a neutral, cold expression. Everything is functioning exactly as intended, and that's how he wanted it. He didn't touch the cradle this time because there was nothing to check. Instead, he stepped back slightly, his mind already processing the future. By my calculations, I'm stronger than Thragg now, so I'm not worried about him anymore. In fact, I think I'm peak Mark at the end of the Invincible comic. Next I'll have to find Angstrom. That won't be difficult to say the least. But first I must raise this little one. Based on what I've seen in the comics, she will be able to make sure I never die, no matter the injury I sustain. However, I don't want to rely on her for too long, and that's where my next plan comes in. First, I need to check the lottery and see what I can obtain this time, plus I remember seeing a notification about my system being upgraded. 45 comments 0 vote. Interrogation. System upgraded. New features unlocked. Evolution tab, custom pocket dimension, storage dimension. Seeing this, he quickly opened the evolution tab. Host, welcome to the evolution tab. Here you can track your own evolution to further enhance yourself. The evolution genome can scale your potential to limitless levels, but you must meet evolution requirements. Luckily, you have already met the requirements when you defeated Battle Beast and pushed your limits. This feature is very important because no amount of training and fighting will make you stronger now that you are at the pinnacle of your species. Here's one evolution genome, pick a new biological trait, and enhance your potential. Options for biological traits. 1. Limitless physical potential. Your potential for strength and speed is now limitless and unbound by your genes or biology. You can grow strong to the point where you might as well crush planets with one hand and even further beyond. 2. Limited adaptation. You can adapt to a limited amount of environments and forms of energy, like magic, removing your weakness to these elements. 3. Energy assimilation. With this trait, you're now a cosmic conductor. With enough effort, you can assimilate with any type of energy, even chaos or void energy. The only downside is that you may only exert the energy physically, you cannot use it any other way. Let's save this for later. That way Il chose what I really need. He closed the tab and opened another one for the custom pocket dimension. What greeted him were options for customizing a barren world. The options listed were size, circumference, environment, density, gravity, composition, time, etc. So the various options would allow him to customize every detail of this dimension to however he liked, including how time flowed. Lastly, he checked the storage dimension. It was basically self-explanatory. He could store anything inside, like those storage rings in fiction. So he decided to toss the infinity ray inside to test it out. It went inside and disappeared from sight, but Harold could feel in his soul that it was there. This made him chuckle as he opened the lottery system. He wanted to try his luck and spin the wheel, so first he spun the multiplier value system. The value changed constantly at speeds even he couldn't perceive, which made him wonder how that's possible. You have 1 won and 12 Jayon X. This made him shake his head in disappointment, but he continued and spun the reward wheel that would be multiplied. The wheel spun rapidly as he anticipated something good, or bad, either the thought of it was interesting. The wheel then slowed down at the rare rewards section, which, of course, excited him. Congratulations, you've won 1 mystery supremium isotope. Holy supremium, it's so over for Thragg and anyone else. Just one of these things can bend reality, which is already ridiculous. He still had 1 more lottery ticket since he won 2, but he held onto it because there were already a lot of things to go over, like the evolution stuff. Near Earth's moon, a Viltrumite cruiser hovered silently in the shadow of the moon. Inside, the atmosphere was slightly tense as a new person was on board after not seeing his fellow kind in a long time. Nolan Grayson stood at the center of the chamber, arms relaxed at his sides, though his eyes remained sharp, but it would be a stretch to say he's happy to see them. Across from him was General Thragg, along with several elite Viltrumites, as the questioning had already begun. Your progress? Thragg asked, his tone directed at him like a commander. After all, he was used to imposing this tone on those who ranked below him. Nolan didn't like the situation he was placed in because of someone else's disobedience, but he still had to answer. Steady as of currently, he replied. The planet remains under my observation, and soon, I will execute my plan. Thragg studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly, saying in a disdainful voice, Yes, General Thragg, I have weakened the planet's defense and it is ready for subjugation. Nolan, isn't that precisely what I'm supposed to be hearing from you? Instead you're telling me about some plan. How long has it been since we sent you here? Nolan shook his head, saying, It's not that simple, sir. If silence, I don't care why you haven't done your duty as of yet, you will give whatever explanation you have to the Grand Regent. I didn't come here for you anyway. I have another matter to discuss that requires your observation on this planet. Nolan's expression didn't change, but deep inside, he knew what he was going to say. "Where is Harold?" Craig said. "His last known location traces back to this system," Craig continued. "We want to know if you've seen or encountered him." Nolan felt irritation rise inside. He thought to himself, not my fucking responsibility. He kept that thought contained likewise. Instead, he answered, "I haven't seen him directly," Nolan said. "But there was something." Craig narrowed his eyes slightly as he said, "Explain." Nolan didn't rush because he wanted to choose his words carefully. "A few days ago," he said, "there was a disturbance. A shockwave, something left the atmosphere at high speed. Too fast to properly track." The elites exchanged brief glances. Nolan continued as he rested his hands on the table, "Look, if your records say Harold passed through here, then it was probably him." Craig nodded saying, "That aligns with our data. Did he interact with anything on the planet?" Craig asked. Nolan shook his head, "Not that I saw." Craig studied him for a moment longer, as if weighing the response. "Very well." The questioning shifted briefly back to standard protocol, but nothing else of importance surfaced, eventually ending with Nolan being dismissed. "You will continue your mission." Craig walked closer to him. He was actually face to face with him as he said that. Nolan nodded as he helped back a snort of disdain, "Of course." With that, Nolan turned and left the chamber, exiting the cruiser and returning toward Earth without another word. 15 comments 0 vote. Curiosity. Inside the ship, silence lingered for a moment while the elites dispersed, returning to their respective duties. Only Craig remained in the room. After a few seconds, he turned and walked toward a separate chamber, which was private and sealed. Once inside, the door closed behind him. He activated the communication channel. It took a moment as it was processing data and verifying his clearance level. Thragg appeared in the form of a hologram on the interface. "Well?" Thragg asked. Craig stood straight at attention. "Harold passed through Earth's system," he reported. Nolan confirmed an unidentified high-speed departure consistent with his capabilities. Thragg said nothing, so Craig continued, "He didn't remain. No confirmed contact with the planet. His current location, unknown." "As expected," Thragg said. "He grows stronger and more independent. I always wondered why he trained so much, so it was for times like these after all. A brilliant Viltrumite indeed, it's a shame. He will be dealt with." The line went quiet with that as Craig remained standing for a moment longer before ending the transmission. Outside, the cruiser adjusted its position slightly, preparing for its next move. Right now, in a dense forest, a small figure hovered a few meters above the ground. If one looked closer, they would notice this place was peculiar because of the surroundings. This was Harold's pocket dimension, where time flowed extremely slowly than the outside reality. Heck, 10 years here was 1 minute in the outside world. That's exactly why the young girl who trained constantly looked older. Harold had brought Samantha Eve in his custom pocket dimension where 8 years had passed. She wore a small robe while her hair was tied in a ponytail. Her body trembled slightly as she tried to maintain control of her powers. Her arms were stiff, her movements unstable, but she forced herself to stay in the air. "Don't fall, don't fall." Then she dropped onto the ground suddenly. Ah, thud, she hit the ground and rolled slightly before stopping. For a few seconds, she just lay there, breathing heavily saying, "Damn it." A few meters away, Harold stood with his arms folded, watching. "Again," he said with speaking too much. Eve groaned. "I just fell." And she turned her head and glared at him. "You're not even gonna help me get up?" "No," Harold said with a contorted face. "You're the worst. Get up and stop complaining. I don't like complainers." She stared at him for a second, then sighed and pushed herself up anyway. Her legs were shaky and breathing uneven, but she lifted off the ground again. This time she stayed up longer. 5 seconds, which made her smile in true MPH and get excited, but that was a mistake as her focus was lost. She tilted too far to the side and dropped again. She slammed her fist lightly into the ground. Harold didn't move to help or anything, he just watched patiently. Her control is improving, still sloppy though, but greatness cannot be rushed. She looked up at him again. "Did you see that? I stayed up a bit longer than usual." Harold shook his head, saying, "Only a little." That was more than before. She pouted like a furious child. He ignored her comments and said, "Again." She frowned but got up anyway. She went back into position under his gaze, and began trying harder. That went on for a while, each time slightly better, but it was still not enough. Eventually, she dropped again and didn't get up. She just lay there, staring at the sky as her chest huffed. "I'm tired." Harold then walked over. He stood above her for a second, looking down. Sweat everywhere, breathing unevenly, arms slightly trembling. "I've worked her to the bone today, but she must reach her limits every day so they can be exceeded." "Fine," he said, "that's enough for now." She turned her head quickly. "Really?" "Yes. You're not tricking me, are you?" "No, just get up and go rest before I change my mind." She relaxed instantly, finally. She sat up slowly and wiped her face. "I did better today, didn't I?" She was fishing for his approval, which was usual since she looked up to Harold, especially when he once demonstrated his strength. So right now she craved his praise. It felt good to be praised by someone so strong. Harold looked back slightly, his face contorted in anger and disdain, but then it suddenly relaxed as his expression became neutral again. "You are capable of far better, that's why I believe in you." She smiled a little at that as she jumped up and followed him closely like a child in bliss. Then she looked at him again, not with the same tired frustration from training, but with that familiar curiosity that never really left her. It always came back once she caught her breath, once the exhaustion stopped screaming at her muscles. She shifted where she sat, pulling one leg closer and resting her chin on her knee, watching him like she was trying to figure something out she hadn't quite solved yet. Harold noticed it immediately. He didn't react or ask, but he already knew something was coming. She only stared like that when she was about to start asking questions he didn't feel like answering. "You know," she started, dragging the words out a little, "testing the waters, you've never actually told me where you're from." Harold didn't respond right away. He didn't look at her either, just kept his arms folded, gaze forward, like the question didn't carry any importance. But internally, he already dismissed it. Still, she didn't drop it. "I mean, seriously," she continued, sitting up straighter now, a bit more energy creeping back into her voice. "You just showed up one day from the crash site, took me in, started training me, and that's it. You haven't said anything about what you really are your people. Don't you miss your people? What was the name? Viltrumites. That's kinda weird." It was due time these questions started pouring in, especially since he concocted a bullshit story about her origin. He would never say he kidnapped her from Earth. Instead, he simply told her that she was on a crash site in an alien aircraft and she was the only survivor. 11 comments, 0 vote. More questions? Not really, he replied flatly. She squinted at him. "Yeah, it is. People have backgrounds like mine, you know." "I have one," Harold said as he adjusted his clothes. In all honesty, these questions made him think about the first 30 years of his new life. "Okay," she said, pointing at him slightly, "then what is it?" Harold glanced at her this time. He didn't like her curious nature. Heck, he didn't enjoy any of this. He just wanted an OP trump card at the end of the day, but he would be lying if he said this girl didn't remind him of his previous young self. Like her, he was curious about the world he barely saw from the hospital room due to his cancer. So he could see himself in her as much as he hated that. "That's not me anymore. I am no longer a little boy anymore." That was weak and pathetic. His fists clenched as he thought back to those moments. Never again will anyone have my life in their hands, not Thragg, not my mother, no one. "It's not important, Eve, focus on your training and stop bothering me." She blinked, then frowned. "Not important to you or not important to me?" "Both." She let out a small breath through her nose, clearly not satisfied with that. "That doesn't make sense," she said. "How is it not important? Everything comes from somewhere. I think you just don't want to tell me. I thought we weren't hiding anything from each other." Harold didn't answer immediately. He already knew where this was going, and more importantly, he knew it didn't lead anywhere useful. To him this was a waste of time. "Where I'm from doesn't change anything," he said after a moment. "It doesn't affect your training. It doesn't affect your progress. I will only tell you things that affect those things, like for example, if you stop pestering me and focus, you will get better faster. It's that simple." Eve tilted her head slightly, watching him carefully as she said, "So it's bad, admit that you have a tragic backstory like a villain." "Ha ha ha, is that what you think?" He crouched next to her and asked. "Yes, you're like my arch nemesis. He's a villain trying to steal my hero's powers. He is cold and brutal like you." Eve said, referring to the toys that she used to play with. Harold remembered vividly when she made individual toys clash in a fight, typical of a child. The only problem was that she based her villain on him, she even tried to imitate his voice whenever she played with the toy. This made Harold think deeply. Had he not kidnapped her and only took her once she was grown into an adult, this child's play would have been reality, they would have fought in real life, which made him chuckle. But Harold paid no mind to these childish antics. Instead, he would continue checking on his cave. He had also held off on the evolution and mystery supreme box, his focus was on training her, which had plenty of time to do so in his pocket dimension. She sighed and said, "What I am basically trying to say is that, now it feels like you're hiding something." "I am actually." He didn't say that out loud, instead he said, "Focus on what matters." She groaned lightly and leaned back onto her hands. "You always say that," she muttered. "Everything is, focus on what matters with you." Harold scoffed, saying, "Because you don't. If you did I wouldn't be saying that, child. You're asking pointless questions instead of recovering, and soon you will be complaining saying you're still tired." "That's not pointless," she shot back immediately. "It's normal. People ask things like this." "We're not people." That made her pause as she raised her eyebrows. She looked at him again, her expression shifting slightly. She couldn't help but ask, "What does that even mean?" "We are gods, Eve. I'm no longer just a person is weak, I'm not weak, so never refer to me or us in that manner. I've worked too hard just to still remain a person." Harold looked frustrated, but he calmed down and sighed as he continued, "Forget what I said, I'm just tired of your questioning because it's getting on my bad side." Eve stared at him for a second longer, then sighed and looked away, running a hand through her hair as she spoke again, "Okay, fine. If you're not gonna tell me where you're from, at least tell me this." Harold didn't respond, but she took that as permission to continue. "Were you always this strong?" 10 comments 0 vote, isotopes. As the questioning continued, Harold placed 5 different boulders that he ripped out of the earth. This was for target practice and to take things up a notch. So when she asked him that question, it made him think of the beginning when he was reborn, so he answered quietly, "No." Her eyes lit up slightly. "See? That wasn't hard," she said as she stood up and stretched her joints, knowing that he wanted to begin training. "So what happened? Did you train like crazy or something?" "Something like that. You know, it wasn't easy. I had to sacrifice a lot, that's why I'm here today right now, fearing no one," Harold said. He then continued before she could reply, "The thing about strength, Eve, is that it is well earned. Once one gets stronger, one can never go back." She listened attentively with wide eyes. She always enjoyed it when her master explained his answer instead of dismissing her. After all, it was rare for Harold to entertain her. It was to the point where she sometimes thought he was annoyed with her, but she didn't want to believe that. She wanted to believe that they had a close connection. After all, she was the only person she knew all her life. On top of that, she looked up to him, his strength and intellect too were admirable. Of course, this was Harold's doing, he baked this mindset into her using manipulation tactics like a true beast. From a young age, he showered her with fake affection to make her rely on him. Not only that, but he also showed her what could be possible by demonstrating his wisdom and skills. This is what enforced the admiration. Now his efforts have somewhat paid off, but he wasn't yet sure if she was loyal, you never know, so he still needed to work on that. What else? Tell more, she argued. Understanding things always helps, you know. Please tell me. Harold chuckled. Her enthusiasm to harness his wisdom made him feel proud inside, but in all honesty, he didn't really consider himself the smartest person. There were times when he did stupid things, but mistakes are made, and nothing can change that unless one becomes a perfectionist. Harold sighed and said, "When I was a boy, Eve, I had nobody but myself. This has never changed ever, nobody was coming to save me. So instead of losing hope I took things into my own hands, and I gave it my all. Every single day. I lived and breathed fighting and training, nothing else was on my mind. That's why I'm strong. You can do the same as long as you keep training under my watch, and we will both make those who bring pain to this reality suffer. Think about it, had your parents been strong enough, they wouldn't have died the way they did. You see what I mean?" Eve looked at him peculiarly. "Why yes, I do. That's why you make me train so much, so we don't have to suffer, right?" "Yes, that's precisely it, you're learning, good girl," he said as he patted her head, which made her lean in with a smile on her face. "Now let's get back to training." With that, They went back to what they were doing. Comma 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 comma. They didn't stay in the forest after that. There was nothing left to do there as training was done. Harold lifted off first, his body rising smoothly into the air, while Eve followed right after. Her ascent was better than before, fewer wobbles and more control, but still not perfect. She adjusted mid-air, correcting herself quickly to impress Harold, but he wasn't paying attention. In fact, he was looking at the system right now. Harold sliced his hand in the air, which caused a very interesting effect. Through this slice, he could see the inside of his cave. So he opened it wider. It almost looked like a tear in reality, but it was just him leaving his pocket dimension in an unconventional manner. This made him wonder if the reverse would cause the same effects. Could he be in the cave and split reality, leading to the inside of his pocket dimension, or was it just possible only when he was inside? Harold entered first, landing near the entrance before pushing the boulder aside with one hand. Eve landed behind him and immediately moved inside. "My stuff," she said, her tone instantly shifting again. Harold stepped in after her, letting the boulder fall back into place, sealing the cave. Eve didn't care about any of that. She rushed straight to her corner, dropping down and grabbing one of her toys without hesitation. "Okay, you go here." "No, that's wrong," she muttered to herself, already absorbed. Harold watched her for a brief second, then he turned away. Instead, he walked deeper into the cave. If one looked closer, he didn't wear his usual Viltrumite uniform. That's because he tossed it into the sun. Now that he thinks about it, he feels like he was doing too much. He picked up the new suit and began putting it on, adjusting each part carefully, making sure everything sat correctly. In the meantime, he opened the mystery box to see what isotope he would get. "Congratulations, you have earned an emerald isotope. Promotes the rapid growth of organic life, specifically plants." Not what I expected, but I won't complain. Instead, I take the hand I'm dealt with and create an opportunity. If I remember correctly, it was used to sprout massive, super strong vines or roots to bind powerful opponents like Supreme or Suprema, who might otherwise easily fly away. It can also help combatants use it to instantly create dense forests or thorny structures to obscure vision or provide cover during a fight. I mean, it's not the best compared to other reality warping isotopes, but it's something useful. Now it's time to pick an evolution. 26 comments, 0 vote. Choosing evolution. Options for biological traits. 1. Limitless physical potential. Your potential for strength and speed is now limitless and unbound by your genes or biology. You can grow strong to the point where you might as well crush planets with one hand and even further beyond. 2. Limited adaptation. You can adapt to a limited amount of environments and forms of energy, like magic, removing your weakness to these elements. 3. Energy assimilation. With this trait, you're now a cosmic conductor. With enough effort, you can assimilate with any type of energy, even chaos or void energy. The only downside is that you may only exert the energy physically, you cannot use it any other way. Why are they all so useful for my current situation, and yet I can only choose one? The system really put me in a tough situation. Harold sat down and spent the next hour thinking on what's best for him now. Limitless strength is good, heck, I might even become like Saitama if I train hard enough. Then there is limitless adaptation. I can adapt to most things, maybe even magic and reality manipulation, making it so that it won't affect me. Lastly, there's energy assimilation. I might be guessing, but this could mean I can absorb any type of energy. Isn't that op? What if I absorb cosmic energy? Fuck, why are they all so good? System, I think you did this on purpose. They are all op in their own unique way, but I can't make up my mind for some reason. Harold shook his head and stood up. He closed the system and went to take care of others' business on his mind, like killing Thragg, so he created a time trial. Time trail. Kill Thragg. Duration, 3 days. Reward, 1 lottery ticket, multiverse gift card 1x. That's weird, no more strength boosts. Is it because I'm at the absolute peak? Whatever, I want that multiverse gift card because it sounds like something good can come out of it. With this, he left the room and headed up to the base level, seeing Eve still playing with her toys using her imagination. He watched her for a few seconds, then said, "I'm leaving." She looked up at him and said while stuttering, "What did you say?" Harold shook his head, saying, "I said I'm leaving, I'll be back in a few days or weeks, don't miss me for too long." He immediately went to the entrance without waiting for her input on his departure. Even if she wanted to say something, he had already disappeared. The council chamber carried the same tension it always did when Thragg spoke, a quiet that wasn't natural but enforced by presence alone. The battle cruiser tore through space at light speed, systems humming with informative prompts and analysis, while inside every Viltrumite stood with rigid attention. Thragg was mid-sentence, outlining the next phase of expansion, his tone absolute, every word measured with purpose as if the future of their species depended on each syllable landing exactly where it should. In many ways, it did. Our reduced numbers do not grant us hesitation, Thragg said, his gaze sweeping across the room, locking onto each general and elite as if testing their resolve. It demands efficiency. We will not weaken. We will not stall. Every planet we encounter will either kneel or be. The sentence never finished as the wall beside him detonated inward. It wasn't just broken but erased. Reinforced plating that contained structural alloy, and an internal framework burst apart in a violent explosion, fragments scattering across the chamber as a shockwave rippled through the room. The floor cracked under the force, the air pressure became heavy then null. Then Harold was there in the midst of all. He crossed the distance in less than a blink and grabbed Thragg by the face with a full hand. The impact alone forced Thragg half a step back, the floor beneath his feet fracturing further as Harold's grip locked in place. Fingers dug into his skull with overwhelming force, pinning him where he stood. Then Thragg moved as his battle instincts kicked in, his hand shot up instantly, gripping Harold's wrist, his strength surging without restraint as he tried to tear the hand away. There was no hesitation or disbelief in the action itself, only in the result spoke the loudest. Because it didn't move at all, not even slightly, Harold's wrist wouldn't budge. Thragg's eyes sharpened, his other hand came up, reinforcing his grip, applying more force and pressure, enough to rip apart most opponents without effort. Still Harold's arm remained exactly where it was, unmoving, like it had been anchored in place. That was when it registered, a truth he couldn't believe dawned on him like a slap to the face. Thragg didn't waste time questioning it. As a seasoned warrior, he couldn't lose focus questioning reality just yet. He acted again as his fist drove forward, slamming directly into Harold's abdomen with a force that it teared through the whole room. The impact echoed through the chamber, a deep, violent sound as the metal groaned in protest. Thragg then struck again, this time aiming for the face, his punch faster than anything most Viltrumites have seen. This realized another shockwave that finally made the section they were in explode, and the ship was torn in half as they were exposed in the vacuum of space. Harold didn't even blink during all of this. In fact, he had a look of disdain. It was as if he wasn't worried that Thragg could do anything right now. This obviously surprised Thragg. He wondered how Harold got so strong within such a short time. Is he even normal? It wasn't even that Harold was enduring the blows. It was more like they didn't matter at all to him. Harold tilted his head slightly, his grip tightening just enough to be dangerous. "Are you done?" he asked as a smirk spread across his face. 9 comments 0 vote. Thragg, your time has come. The tone was mocking to the person on the receiving end, but before anyone could speak up, Harold stepped forward and launched. The cruiser's remnants shook violently as he burst through the opposite side of the chamber, dragging Thragg with him. The hull didn't slow him down, it shattered, opening another breach in the wreckage. Alarms began to trigger as systems scrambled to stabilize the damage. But there was no saving this ship anymore. The damage was done and there was no fixing to be done unless the Viltrumite pushed the thing back home and tried repairs. But that would be wishful thinking if one were to believe they will actually bother doing that. Out in the void, Harold didn't stop immediately. He carried Thragg further out, putting distance between them and the cruiser, far enough that interference wouldn't take place, at least that's how far he thought he was going. Then he let go of Thragg's face by tossing him into the distance. His body drifted backward, cutting through space before he stabilized himself, halting his momentum with precise control. He hovered there, adjusting his posture to display his regal, his expression no longer carrying the authority of a commander addressing subordinates. But not it held deadly focus that wouldn't dare take its eyes of Harold for even a second. Harold hovered opposite him, relaxed, shoulders loose, that same faint smirk still resting on his face as if everything had gone exactly as expected. They didn't speak right away, they just looked at each other with contempt. Thragg's mind moved quickly, processing the interaction, replaying it, breaking it down step by step to understand what was going on. How did Harold grow so strong? Is this a different being posing as him? If so, why would this mysterious entity pretend to be Harold? Still, he decided to play along. He wanted to catch this intruder slipping up in its masquerade. "You've improved, Harold," Thragg said finally, his voice steady as if he already forgave Harold for what he just did. Harold exhaled lightly as if he was annoyed, he even rolled his eyes. "Took you long enough, it was long brutal journey, but hey. I'm here now." There was no respect in his tone, it was clear he didn't care about that. Thragg, too, couldn't care about his informality, it was the least of his worries. "You've deserted from the Empire repeatedly," he continued, his voice solemn as if he was a disappointed father. "You disappear, act independently, and now you attack me directly. Why, Harold? Explain to me what influences this behavior, and we will fix it together. Now, more than ever, is the time when we stop tearing each other apart and rebuild our home." Harold tilted his head slightly, considering the question like it wasn't as serious as it should have been. "I am home." Thragg, look around you. What do you see? I'll tell you what I see what belongs to us. Isn't that the Viltrumite motto, all is ours? I've come to the realization that it's not true, not everything is ours, heck, it can't. I didn't want everything, Thragg, what I wanted was power. And that day when you had my life in your hands was the day I needed it more than ever. Thragg's eyes furrowed as he said, "So that's why you abandoned us, to chase strength. What did you sacrifice for this upgrade? Either way, you will stand down now." "Or what?" Harold asked. He genuinely wanted to know what he would do, or what he could do. Thragg didn't answer immediately, because for the first time in a long time, especially since he was used to being the strongest, the answer wasn't simple anymore. Behind them, the ruined cruiser kept drifting in its position as multiple figures exited at high speed, closing the distance rapidly. Lucan arrived first, his eyes locking onto the two figures instantly. Anissa followed close behind, her expression tightening as she took in the scene. Craig came last, his gaze sharp as he assessed what had just happened. They formed a loose perimeter, not too close or too far. None of them spoke at first. They had all seen enough already to know what was going, so they wouldn't bother trying to ask backward questions. Lucan broke the silence first, his tone low. "What does he think he's doing?" The question wasn't really meant to be answered as it was clear as day that Harold wanted to challenge Thragg. Craig stepped forward slightly, saying, "Harold," he called out. "Stand down." Harold didn't look at him or even acknowledge him. "Make me Craig," he said without even looking at him, his eyes were only on Thragg. Lucan frowned. "You understand what you're doing? We will all attack you," he asked. Harold let out a small breath as he said, "I'm rotting for you, give me your best shot, all of you." Anissa spoke instead of obliging his invitation to attack him at once. "Harold, you're challenging the Grand Regent, your Grand Regent," she emphasized, then continued, "I don't suppose you have a death wish or some suicidal intentions." Thragg remained still, his posture composed, but there was a difference now. Subtle, but undeniable. The situation had changed. He wasn't addressing a subordinate anymore. He was facing something else completely, so he resigned any form of convincing, saying, "You've made your move." Thragg's stance shifted slightly, his body adjusting in a way only experienced fighters would recognize as a stance took place. "Then understand this," he said, his voice lowering just enough to carry meaning without being too loud. "You don't control what happens next." Harold let out a chuckle, then his face instantly became cold and expressionless. The next second reality distorted as Harold pulled his punch. It wasn't too crazy, but one could see the space swallow itself as he pulled his punch. 8 comments 0 vote, fighting Thragg. Harold let out a low chuckle, his expression shifting immediately after as all traces of amusement vanished from his face, leaving behind something far colder and far more sinister. The next moment felt wrong in a way that couldn't be explained through simple observation, because as he drew his fist back, the space around his arm began to warp unnaturally, folding inward as if reality itself was being compressed by the sheer force behind the motion. It wasn't exaggerated or explosive, but it was undeniable, the void around them subtly bending as if it could no longer remain stable under the pressure Harold was about to release. Thragg saw it clearly and reacted without hesitation, his body moving forward instead of retreating as he chose to meet the attack head-on rather than allow momentum to build against him. His own fist came forward with perfect timing, the angle precise as he aimed to intercept the strike before it could fully unfold. The moment their fists collided, everything seemed to freeze for the smallest fraction of time, like reality itself needed a second to process what had just occurred before the consequences could follow. Then the shockwave erupted outward with violent intensity, tearing through space as if it had physical substance, forcing the distant cruiser to shudder under the impact while the surrounding vacuum distorted under the pressure. The elite Viltrumites watching from afar were pushed back, despite their distance, as their bodies were forced to adjust to the sheer force of the clash rippling outward without discrimination. Harold remained exactly where he was, unmoved. At the same time, Thragg's arm was driven back to the point where it forced him to rotate rapidly unwillingly. In fact, the collision sent him flying past two planets, each 3 million kilometers apart, but he didn't realize it because it happened so fast. In fact, he thought he was still in his previous position. After all, Harold was already right next to him with folded arms behind his back as if nothing had happened. So this made him think the punch only pushed him back 3 meters as he rotated rapidly, but they were already an insane distance away from where the conversation took place. However, Thragg did feel a stinging pain run through his arm as if his bones were about to shatter right then and there. Thragg didn't pause to dwell on what just happened as he stopped rotating like a spinning top, his movements continuing seamlessly as he pivoted his body and drove his knee forward into Harold's abdomen with devastating force, the kind of strike that would have incapacitated most opponents instantly. The impact landed cleanly, the force echoing outward. Heck, Harold didn't even bother dodging or moving out of the way, his body absorbed the blow without any real consequence beyond a minor adjustment in position of only 1 inch. There was no sign of pain in his response as his hand shot forward, catching Thragg's arm mid-motion before twisting and redirecting his entire body. Thragg was thrown across space with utter savage violence, his form cutting through the void like a cosmic needle before stabilizing after a great distance, his gaze snapping back to Harold, who followed with sharpened intensity. "I am going to enjoy this, haha," Harold thought. Thragg's anger grew as he no longer wanted to waste his attacks, so he launched forward again, his speed increasing as he aimed to overwhelm Harold through precision and tactic rather than brute force alone. His fist cut through space toward Harold's head, but Harold tilted just enough to avoid it, the movement minimal yet perfectly timed. This made Thragg's eyes widen in dread as Harold stepped in and drove his elbow casually into Thragg's ribs with crushing force. The sound of the impact carried even through the vacuum, a dull crack that signaled the difference in their current states as Thragg's body bent into Harold's blow before Harold followed up immediately with a series of strikes that left no room for recovery. Each hit landed with calculated efficiency, forcing Thragg backward as he blocked what he could and redirected what he couldn't, his focus sharpening further as he adapted to the overwhelming pressure. Still, the difference remained clear, because Harold wasn't simply fighting, he was playing with his meal. Thragg countered with everything he had, his hand snapping forward as he attempted to grip and crush Harold's shoulder, but the result remained unchanged as his strength failed to break through the dense muscles. Harold didn't acknowledge the attempt, in fact, he hasn't even acknowledged anything as of yet. Instead, he drove his knee upward before into Thragg's face, following with a downward strike with both hands cupped together that sent Thragg crashing toward a nearby dwarf planet. The descent was fast and violent, Thragg hitting the surface like a meteor as the crust fractured on impact, shockwaves tearing across the terrain as the ground split beneath him. Harold followed slowly descending into the planet like a graceful angel, but he was far from the kind of entity. Seeing Thragg get up, he descended through the atmosphere with enough force to tear through the sky itself as he closed the distance instantly. Thragg burst from the crater to meet him, his counterattack already in motion as the two collided again with devastating force. This time, the planet couldn't hold under the strain, the surface cracking and collapsing as mountains shattered and oceans surged violently, the entire world beginning to falter under the pressure of their attacks. The fight escalated further, as their movements became faster and more destructive as they tore through the planet with each exchange. Thragg adapted continuously, his attacks becoming precise as he aimed for openings, but Harold's defense remained unshaken, his body absorbing every hit with minimal effect. Bruises formed across his skin, faint marks that disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared, while Thragg's own damage accumulated in a way that couldn't be ignored as blood ran down his nose and mouth. Harold seized control again, grabbing Thragg mid-punch and launching him across the surface, sending him tearing through mountains before closing the distance instantly to continue the bullying. Thragg met him again, landing a clean strike to Harold's face that forced his head to turn slightly, but he used his face to push the punch back. Harold looked back at him immediately with a vicious grin. 30 comments 0 vote, fighting Thragg 2. The planet beneath them began to collapse entirely, cracks spreading across its surface as the core failed under the strain of their battle, specifically Harold's explosive punches. Harold drove his fist into Thragg's chest with overwhelming force, sending him through the planet's layers with rapid punches. "How does it feel to be on the other side of death? Tell me," Harold screamed out as they flew through the planet's molten lava. Harold made sure to shove Thragg's face into the lava and kept it there until they flew out onto the other side of the world as it began to tremble and flare in destruction. Boom! Fragments broke away into space, drifting aimlessly as the two continued their fight across the debris, moving from one collapsing mass of rock to another without slowing down. Thragg continued to resist, his strikes landing repeatedly, but the difference had already been decided as Harold's endurance remained unmatched, his body refusing to break under the pressure. The realization settled in fully as Harold caught Thragg's final punch, his grip tightening before pulling him forward into a direct, crushing punch to the chest that knocked the air out of his lungs. He followed with a pinpoint slap to both his ears to disable his flight capabilities and stun him, which made him wince in pain. Harold drove him downward toward the largest remaining fragment, slamming him into its surface with enough force to shatter it instantly before descending after him without pause. The final impact broke what remained of the fragment, Thragg's body embedded within the fractured remains as Harold grabbed him by the throat and slammed him down once more. He stood over him, his body marked only by fading bruises, as he looked down at the fallen figure beneath him, the outcome no longer in question of strength. Thragg's body remained embedded within the fractured mass for only a moment before the debris around him began to shift, small pieces of broken rock lifting and drifting as the pressure around his form changed. The silence that followed Harold's last strike didn't last, because Thragg's chest rose slowly. When he moved, it wasn't sudden or reckless, his hand pressed against the shattered ground as he forced himself upright, small dust falling from his shoulders while his gaze lifted once more to meet Harold's. Blood traced along the edge of his mouth, thin at first, then more as it ran down his chin. He even had to spit out multiple teeth as his mouth was bloodied. It carried itself into the void where it dispersed into nothingness. "Harold, I will not deny that you're significantly stronger than me," Thragg said, as his eyes narrowed slightly. "But if you think that I will give up or surrender, you're mistaken. In fact, this is exactly what I need. I needed my weakness to be exposed one day so I could grow stronger, and you have shown me what's possible if I keep fighting." Harold didn't respond, his expression remaining cold as he watched Thragg stand again. There was no frustration in his gaze or impatience. "Good, then keep fighting, why are we still talking?" he said finally with a flat tone. Thragg moved first, his fist driving forward with an intensity that carried far more than raw force. Harold met it head-on, their collision sending another violent shockwave through the remaining debris, fragments scattering in every direction as the force tore apart what little structure remained around them. A strike landed across Harold's side with enough force to ripple out a shockwave, followed immediately by another aimed at his jaw, the combination forcing a slight push in Harold's stance as the impacts connected in rapid succession. Harold adapted just as quickly, caught a punch, and delivered his own into Thragg's gut, which made him fold into his fist in pain. Then he lifted Thragg's chin up to meet his gaze. As Thragg was holding onto his abdomen due to the pain and looking into Harold's eyes, Harold backhanded him with force that shot him back. The collision shattered the fragment beneath him, splitting it apart. Harold folded his arms behind him as he followed Thragg. Upon reaching him, he kicked him into another fragment with a sharp swing to the face. But before he reached the floating rock, he caught up and did an axe kick onto Thragg's skull, burying him deep into the rock. But he didn't remove his foot as he stepped onto Thragg's face, plunge it deeper into the rock as if he was an insect. Thragg clenched his teeth as his eyes were now bloodshot. He broke free with a sharp rotation, his leg cutting upward in a clean arc that connected with Harold's side, the force enough to send him crashing through multiple fragments in succession. For the first time, Harold was pushed back across a meaningful distance, his body tearing through debris before he halted himself mid-flight, sending a shockwave because of his abrupt stop, his expression unchanged despite the impact. He rolled his shoulder once, testing the motion, then launched forward again without hesitation. They met again with greater force than before, their clash producing a shockwave that rippled outward, scattering everything within range. Thragg's strikes became relentless, each one following the last even as Harold dodged each one fluidly without batting an eye, as if he could see the future of where he will attack next. "Stop playing and fight me," Thragg blurted out as Harold kicked his punch away and dodged the next one. 8 comments 0 vote. Thragg's demise. His response came just as quickly as Thragg attacked. He chose to finally grant his wish with a two-piece jab combo to Thragg's face which made him dizzy. He then followed with rapid punches to the abdomen, followed by an uppercut. But Harold grabbed his foot before he flew away and pulled him back, then he used his elbow and brought it down on Thragg's knee, snapping the joint inward. Ah! Harold then grabbed his mouth and ripped his jaw out, followed by a knee to the jugular and windpipe that was exposed. Thragg handled the injury better than he expected, as he clutched his bleeding jaw. In fact, Thragg refused to yield. He stepped forward again, ignoring the damage as his fist drove into Harold's chest, again, and again, each strike pushing harder, faster, as if sheer will alone could close the gap that had formed between them. Harold took the hits without retreating as he gazed at Thragg's futile attempts with disdain. At some point this would have been me if I didn't train and fight, how the tables have turned, he thought as he barely felt the punch. Harold eventually became annoyed as he cocked another punch that folded the space inward behind him, then drove it into his abdomen, sending him to another planetary body as a trail of blood was left behind. The atmosphere ignited around Thragg as he tore through the sky, his descent carving a path of destruction across the surface below as if a nuke just went off. Mountains collapsed and sank into the earth due to the pressure of his landing, the ground fracturing in spider webs that spread for kilometers. Harold then joined the effort to strain the earth as he landed with both feet onto Thragg, pushing him deeper into the crust. It honestly looked like they were drilling a hole into the earth. Harold didn't continue this for too long, he stepped of Thragg's body, then grabbed his neck and banged him against the tunnel wall, and flew back up so that his back scraped against the earth creating a rumbling sound. Of course, this didn't do much to Thragg, but it was still irritating. The planet itself began to tremble, unable to withstand the sustained force being unleashed upon it. Harold didn't stop, his attacks continuing with relentless precision as he forced Thragg downward once more, slamming him into the ground with enough force to split the terrain apart. Lava surged upward from the fractures, with the landscape suffering tectonic changes and massive earthquakes that would transform continents if the fight were on Earth. Harold punched Thragg across the planet through the dense clouds that separated with each impact. He eventually caught up and tossed Thragg's body into a body of water. It wasn't precisely water, but the substance was almost similar, but brownish. Thragg slammed in as if a bomb had gone off, while Harold plunged into the water in pursuit. He punched him again till the bottom of this substance. Thragg would occasionally kick him a distance away, but he immediately caught up and chased. Eventually they beat each other out of the substance and fell back onto land with Harold kicking Thragg into the ribs, releasing a cracking sound. Thragg struggled to rise again, his body pushing against the wet ground as blood continued and the mysterious substance dripped below, his strength still present but no longer enough to match what stood before him. He looked up at Harold, his gaze filled with anger that could kill a person. "Your time has come, Thragg, I'm no longer on your leash," Harold said. He stepped forward, his expression happy as he reached down and grabbed Thragg by the throat, lifting him from the ground with steady hands. "You will never bring pain again to this reality. You will never make billions suffer for no reason. Most importantly, you will never make me feel weak again," he continued quietly, his voice carrying no emotion as he tightened his grip slightly. Thragg punched one final time, his fist connecting with Harold's side, but the impact lacked the force it once mustered. Harold didn't react beyond a slight shift in his face, his focus remaining steady as he drew his arm back once more while planting his feet into the earth. The space around his fist warped again as a large gust of wind accumulated, the same subtle distortion returning as the pressure built, heating up the already compressed air. Behind him, the density of his fist pulled in the surrounding debris and sand as if he was a black hole. This time Harold's face looked serious as he punched directly into Thragg. The force carried through Thragg's body completely, the impact echoing outward as everything around them fractured under the release in a violent ripple. As for Thragg, the power wasn't something he could handle. While Harold clenched his throat, Thragg's body flew back so violently it had to forcibly detach itself from Thragg's head, but since Harold's grip was firm, what was left was the head and the spinal cord connected to the head while the rest of the body flared into a thick fireball as it flew halfway across the planet, eventually circling it. Then it skidded right next to Harold, which made him stop its momentum by placing his foot on it casually. As for Thragg's head with his spinal cord, he held it into the like a trophy as the blood gushed all over his arms and hair. 8 comments 0 vote. Reconcile. The damage had already been done to the planet as tectonic plates kept sinking more of the earth while tsunamis gathered everywhere. 7 hours later, the Viltrumite elites who could never catch up to the fight, were pushing through drifting debris and unstable fragments that still carried the aftereffects of the fight. They used the destruction as a compass to follow where they went and eventually stumbled on a planet that was in uproar. So they flew into the planet, seeing various craters and earthquakes still affecting the ground. Their expressions were ones of shock, wondering how two Viltrumites decimated the planet like this to the point where it was uninhabitable. Still they searched for the two. The search wasn't fruitless after all. Lucan slowed first, his eyes locking onto the scene ahead as if his mind needed a second longer than his body to accept what he was seeing. Thragg's head was saddled on Harold's waist, and Harold stood a short distance away as the outcome had already been decided long before any of them arrived. Anissa came in from the side, her gaze sharper as she studied both of them instead of reacting outright. "The Grand Regent is dead," she said quietly. Craig landed last, his attention shifting once towards Thragg's body before settling on Harold with a look that was filled with anger. "Why, you barbaric, you will die 100 times for this," Craig said after a moment, his voice shaky and in disbelief. Harold didn't rush to speak up, his eyes lingering on Thragg for a second longer before he turned to face them fully. "There's not much to explain," he dismissively announced to them, then continued. "He wasn't strong enough anymore, and we don't have the margin to pretend otherwise." Lucan frowned slightly, stepping forward without fully committing to closing the distance, if he knew what was best for him right now. Anissa crossed her arms, her posture tightening just a little as she watched him. "Harold, you have defied imperial law and customs. We don't obey you or anyone due to your actions. You are no heir or regent," she said. Harold looked at her as he said, "And who's going to stop from being your leader? You." "The lapdog Craig, let me explain to you the current situation to you. Your empire has failed you and your potential, Thragg has failed you. Believe me, had I not intervened you would have found out what I mean in the next 100 years or so. I did this to show you a world our species have never witnessed, or felt. All you have to do is surrender to me and I will show you this world." There was a pause after that, not because they didn't understand, but because they did and didn't like where it led. Craig exhaled through his nose as he spoke. "You're forcing a transition of power without consensus," he said. "That's not how this works, or will ever work. Had we known you would do this a long time ago." He clearly didn't want to finish his sentence as the meaning was obvious, but this made Harold scoff as his gaze moved between them. "That's exactly how it works, from now on," he said. "It's always been like that, you just didn't have to say it out loud before. At least I had the courage to make it happen. I mean, somebody had to do it." Lucan's and the others' jaws tightened faintly, but he didn't argue immediately, which said more than if he had. Anissa glanced at Craig, their commanding general, briefly with a look that was telling. "I think pretending nothing changed would be worse. We lost most of our people in one event, and we're still acting like we can afford mistakes. That doesn't make sense anymore. What happens now if you fight me? More death. That's not what I want." Craig didn't interrupt this time, waiting patiently before saying, "So what changes? Because if this is just about you being stronger, then nothing actually improves." Harold didn't like that they slowly surrounded him while speaking to him. What kind of a conversation is this? So much hostility. Harold nodded slightly, like that was the first useful question he'd heard. "Now we're getting somewhere. First we will stop wasting resources," he said as he kept an eye on those flanking him. "Then I can kill every one of you before you even blink. Don't force my hand," Harold said, now agitated by their recklessness. They eventually looked at each other with concern before looking at Craig, so he waved his hand, telling them to stop surrounding him. Harold shook his head. He remarked on his delusions for believing they would cooperate after Thragg died. It seems he was truly being wishful. So he sighed as he really didn't want to kill them if they could be so useful in the future. Lucan looked at him again, this time longer, his skepticism still there but not as rigid. "That sounds good in theory," he said. "But it also sounds like you're planning to pull back in places we've always pushed forward. Craig, Anissa, Lucan, Thula, and the rest of you, why die here at my hands? You already saw what happened, and I'm not interested in repeating it just to prove the same point again, especially not when the outcome won't change and the cost will only fall on you, and trust me, you will not be missed. You can call this betrayal, you can call it arrogance, it doesn't matter what word you attach to it, because none of that changes the fact that we can't afford to keep losing people just to protect an idea that stopped working the moment our numbers dropped." He paused to let that settle in their hesitant minds before he continued. "You followed Thragg because he represented certainty, strength, direction, the full package of a leader, and I understand that, I respected that, but look at where that path left us. We're not the same empire we used to be, and pretending we are is the fastest way to finish what that virus started. I'm not asking you to forget what we were, I'm telling you to recognize what we are now, because if you don't adapt to that, then all of this ends with us fading out instead of rebuilding. 30 comments 0 vote, Harold's Chronicles. Far from that scene, the coalition of planets chamber was already tense before anyone spoke, the conversations overlapping with concerns that hadn't been resolved even before new information came in. Titus stood near the center, not raised above the others, but positioned where he could be heard without needing to assert it. We've confirmed internal conflict among them, one representative said, trying to stay composed. That's not speculation anymore, a Viltrumite has deserted from their empire. And we're just hearing this now. Another voice cut in, less patient. If we can get to this Viltrumite who has abandoned his post, he may join our side. We're not embedded in their command structure, Titus said, stepping in before the exchange escalated. We are too reliant on breadcrumbs and timing, instead of certainty and confidence. That's not good enough, the same voice replied, though with less force this time, as Titus was known to make valid arguments, but that's not something they would ever admit, it would hurt their fragile egos. If they are compromised, that changes quite a lot. We can gather information about their next move from this Viltrumite, maybe even more Viltrumites will abandon that rotten empire. I do not disagree with you all, Titus agreed, seeing they were chewed. He continued. But we don't know in what direction this might lead yet, and reacting blindly could make things worse. This Viltrumite might as well be a spy that will expose us if we dare recruit him, think about it. A different representative leaned forward slightly, their expression more measured with clear restraint, as if he wanted to say something else but had to resort to being more practical and composed. If their leadership fractures, they either weaken or consolidate. Those are the only outcomes, they said. Or they can restructure and adapt, which will make them harder to predict and harder to counter, Titus added quietly. There was a brief silence after that as they considered his words. They were reluctant not because they disagreed, but because none of them liked that option. So what do you suggest? Someone asked, less confrontational now about the situation. Titus appreciated this and continued. We wait not passively, but carefully. We gather more before we commit to a direction, Titus said. That's risky, another voice said in refute. So is acting without understanding, Titus replied with a stern voice to make them understand. This continued for a while as they continued delegating about what to do next. Back on a docked Viltrumite cruiser, this one was another ship, in fact it was the last cruiser remaining, but the atmosphere inside felt different. Harold stood where Thragg used to stand, not mimicking him or copying his posture, he was better than that. Instead, he occupied the same space with his own presence. The Grand Regent's uniform fit well enough, the cape settling across his shoulders with a weight that wasn't just physical but mental, and the Viltrumites gathered below him stood in a formation that was familiar but not identical to before. Craig remained to the side, watching without interrupting, while Anissa leaned slightly back, her attention fixed on Harold without the same resistance she had earlier. Harold didn't like the way she was staring at him. Why is this bitch staring at me like that? It reminds me of Eve, anyway. Harold didn't start speaking immediately, letting the silence sit just long enough to make sure they were paying attention for the right reasons. You've all heard some version of what happened, he said finally, his voice steady and clear without needing to rise. If you haven't, you will. No one moved, but the anticipation for an explanation rose in the room. This isn't about replacing one figure with another and pretending everything stays the same, he continued. If that's what you expect, you're going to be disappointed. We lost too much to keep operating the same way our forefathers have, Harold said. That's not an opinion, that's just where we are now. A few exchanged glances, subtly. We adapt to that, or we keep losing until there's nothing left to rebuild with, he added, not pushing anything, just stating the facts. Craig watched him closely, then gave a small nod in approval, just enough to signal alignment with the direction being set. At least he was somewhat on board, that's what mattered to Harold for now. You don't have to agree with every part of this yet, but you will follow it, because the alternative isn't viable anymore. Harold said. One by one, they adjusted in their positions, truing to their peers for consensus, but they clearly acknowledged the change that had already happened. Harold didn't react to that directly, his attention was already moving past the moment and into what came next because for him, the fight had never been the point, it had just been the beginning. The future is looking brighter than ever, If my plan works, we will sail the cosmos as our shadows will eclipse stars and our presence will shatter wills, ha 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 ha. 7 comments 0 vote. Planning some more. Harold placed a shiny new skull in a cabinet. The skull was attached to a spinal cord bone that was also polished clean. It was wrapped around the skull like a snake, but he first gave it an intense look before closing the glass window shut. He then turned around, revealing Craig and the others behind him this whole time. One of the Viltrumites removed his cape gracefully as he sat on the large chair after that. He sighed as he looked at each person thoroughly as if he was internally assessing them. Harold then leaned back while spreading his legs on the seat, then leaned his head on his fist as if he was bored. General Craig, how many Viltrumites are left? Craig immediately answered with an unbothered expression, Sir, there is only 49 of use left, with the death of Thragg. Harold raised a finger up to silence him while clenching his jaw. He then shifted his posture as he leaned forward and clasped his hands together. While looking at Craig, he spoke again, General, set course for Earth, don't ask me why. In the meantime I am going to go get something so I'll be back soon, oh and don't enter the planet until I come back, no matter what. Craig had a lot on his mind right now. In fact, all the Viltrumites were still processing the fact that Harold was the new forcibly installed regent. But for Craig, most importantly he wanted to know what Harold's play was. He wondered why he bothered explaining his actions instead of killing them at the scene. Was he not afraid they would tell all the other Viltrumites about what he did, causing them to crush him? Not that it would work, though, judging from what he's seen. But lo and behold, they didn't act rashly when he divulged the news to the other Viltrumites, because even they knew from what Craig said, they couldn't even make Harold sweat even if they ganged up on him. But deep inside, Craig knew Harold had a point. Their methods had dwindled their capabilities, and who knows how long they would last. This was a concern they refused to acknowledge because they believed themselves above the galaxy in might. But time has said otherwise, and Harold said it out loud. It was akin to the saying, speaking the unspoken. But Craig and the others told themselves it wasn't that simple. Harold, on the other hand, was a different case. As he walked out heading straight to the hangar, his mind wasn't full of concern but planning. He reviewed his previous encounters and fights. I could have killed sooner, but I wanted him to feel despair as he finally felt what we used to feel at his hands. Other than that, there isn't much I can do right now. This was what he told himself as he walked in the hallways. Whenever he passed someone, they stepped out of the way and did a slight bow. But he didn't pay this any attention as he was thinking about what may come next. First, we're going to Earth's moon to lay low and wait for Angstrom to be born a fully capable person, but I'll have to help him and his family so he trusts me. I couldn't care less if the humans see my ship or know of our presence on the moon. Fortunately there's nobody who can do anything about it. Next, we have to open a portal to Marvel or DC and find a compatible strong species or race to breed with, like the Amazons, for example. Honestly, there are many options so I am not limited. He had already reached the airlock and flew into space at warp speed, disappearing out of sight. With a proper army I can and allies, I can conquer the many galaxies and timelines across the verse. Only through peace and nonviolence will this empire reach levels never heard of before, ha ha ha. Imagine that, an entire universe bowing, ah ha ha ha. Harold's words may seem all peaceful and harmonic, but his grin betrayed this notion. Deep inside, something more sinister was stirring as his ambitions gradually climbed a steep ladder. He pictured his vision many times with his race growing stronger and stronger. And more formidable, Argyle, Thragg, subjugating the galaxy isn't that difficult. It's actually easy when you use strategy rather than thinking with your muscles. Tisk, can't believe these people even existed, he thought. Deep down he questioned why these Viltrumites never considered that in order to effectively make the galaxy loyal to you, is to turn its people to your side. One must not invade a country expecting the natives to love you out of thin air. First, you must butter them up and bring the natives to your side, so when you invade, they will not resist, but instead, they will thank you for invading. Imagine that. The more he thought about the more he shook his head. I wouldn't say I'm smarter than them. Heck, I don't consider myself that smart. I just know a better solution, and that is to be logical and tactical. My method might not be the best, but there's no doubt it's the most effective across the board. As for why I'm doing this, the Viltrumites have potential to be something more. I mean, why let them go to waste? Instead I can kingdom build an army of gods. With that in mind, he arrived at his meticulous planet, specifically where his cave resided. And entered swiftly. 10 comments 0 vote. Cursed. Eve, wake up, Harold said as he lightly kicked the little girl lying on the floor, covered in a fur blanket. In fact, this blanket was made by hair, back when Harold threw her in a forest and told her to survive for 5 days. Fortunately she did survive and ended up killing a furry beast, which was when she unlocked her powers. Harsh, yes, but a diamond is forged under pressure or something like that. She groaned and looked up, seeing Harold wearing his previous white uniform but red alternate one that had a symbol in front and had a regal presence. She couldn't help but wonder what he's been up to. "Master, where have you been? What is it you're wearing?" she said as she rose up, yawning while rubbing her eyes. Harold walked past her. He was heading towards his workstation to pick up some notes and journals while saying, "We're leaving, from now on we will live on a ship and train there. You should thank me, you know Bekasu, your living conditions are about to improve." She got up, ruffling her hair, then she folded the blanket gently before tucking it in her saddle. "Two don't believe you. How did you acquire a ship anyway? You doubt your teacher. That's very bad of you. I am disappointed that you don't trust me," Harold said in a sarcastic tone while he packed his valuables. Eve then squinted her eyes at him in suspicion, pausing her actions. This suspicion caused her to ask again, "You still haven't said what it is you're wearing. Is it like an upgrade to your previous uniform or something? Did you get a promotion?" Harold looked at her as if he saw someone take a shit. "It's actually way better than that. Stop asking me questions and finish packing. I don't want to delay this any further." Eve looked down disappointed, then she went back to packing. Harold gave her a quiet look as he thought to himself, "Can her genes pass down to a Viltrumite?" As his mind pondered, they were already done packing with Harold holding onto a case, while Eve had a backpack that was filled with her personal stuff. She created a bodysuit using her powers that was similar to a space suit. Then lifted her in one hand while the other hand was free because he tossed his stuff in his storage dimension. From then on they returned to the ship without Harold or Eve speaking too much. Harold liked this. This was evident because of his smile, which was due to the fact that almost everything that came out of her mouth was questions. Harold understood she was only a curious child who couldn't just change overnight. But it gets to a point. It was one of those feelings when someone asks you questions to the extent where it becomes irritating and boring, but Harold endured and chose which questions were worth answering and which ones weren't. It didn't take long to catch up to the ship with Harold's speed. The hangar airlock automatically opened, letting them swiftly enter because the sensors picked up on their location a while ago. Harold gently dropped Eve while he didn't touch the ground. Instead he continued to hover as he told her to follow him. Eve on the other hand marveled at the ship. She had many questions stirring in her mind about the current situation and the ship. Even the people who wore his previous white uniform were bowing or stepping aside from her master. Is master truly revered like he boasted about? Eve thought as she quickly ran next to Harold because she was falling behind. Harold turned a few corners while Eve marveled at the architect. Eventually, they arrived at the council and planning chambers where Craig and some other Viltrumites were discussing something. But they abruptly stopped due to Harold's presence. Craig stepped forward first, saying, "Sir, we are only 1 day away from Earth." Harold waved him of saying, "Good, I'll tell you the rest of my plans later. For now, vacate the room, and you," he pointed at a random person, "take this child to an unoccupied room, be sure to supervise her as she's under my protection." The Viltrumite nodded and escorted Eve out, who wasn't paying attention to them. It was obvious her curious brain was in another world. With everyone leaving the room, Harold sat alone as he opened the system. Time trail. Kill Thragg. Duration, 3 days. Reward, 1 lottery ticket, multiverse gift card 1x. Completed. He ignored the gift card and instead opened the lottery and spun the wheel with anticipation like an addict. Though he wasn't really addicted, his gaze was telling. 2.01x. He spun the main wheel now. The wheel spun rapidly as you saw, and it slowly stopped at a red section. This section was one he saw multiple times, but the section was very small, meaning that getting anything there was super rare. So using his intuition he expected something good. With high hope, he relaxed on his chair. Congratulations, you won an interdimensional curse rune 2x. Searcher's Wraith. In 15 days, Searcher will spawn at your location with 1 rune skill. Survive or defeat him, or the curse permits him to spawn wherever you are regardless whether you run or hide. Hela, Goddess of Death. In 20 days, Hela will spawn at your location with 1 rune skill. Survive or defeat her, the curse permits her to spawn wherever you are regardless whether you run or hide. Is this a joke system? 6 comments 0 vote. Evolution. Harold's hands were trembling as his face contorted. If the system were a person, it was safe to say this person was in trouble, as he looked like he was ready to tear someone in half with his bare hands. Even a Viltrumite who walked in bearing news hesitated and walked out without asking a question. But who wouldn't be? What kind of a lottery curses one like this? He bit his fist as he began pondering, what kind of lottery is this? What did I do to deserve this? Another question he pondered on was why this system was capable of summoning curses from other multiverses. How was it able to bring these beings to him? Will it teleport them and make them fight him? He highly doubted that, simply because he didn't think the system would snatch beings from other realities for its own satisfaction and demise of Harold, so he had an inkling suspicion that these beings would be copies of the original ones, but with a will to kill him. This made him think more about what else the system is capable of. While thinking, he pulled out Space Racer's gun and inspected it before placing it back into his inventory. Not only can the system reward me, but also curse me. Wouldn't this deter people from using the lottery? Although it's broken and powerful, it seems it can also bring about one's demise. Fortunately, this stupid curse is happening only now when I'm strong. Had it come after me earlier when I was still weaker than Thragg and I unlocked it for the first time. This is why you don't trust all systems, Harold said. He blamed himself for letting his guard down around the system and placing all of his hope inside of it. After all, it did give him juicy rewards in the past, so who wouldn't trust the system after that? Now that I think about it, I should have used that extraction ability on Brittany instead of Juggernaut. Why worry about fast regeneration when I could have had absolute invulnerability? Fuck. What's done is done, but it would be nice to earn that ability again, as I have some people in mind worth extracting. Harold continued processing the current predicament he was in. He opted to stop complaining and make a plan to win. So he delved deeper into the memories of his time in the hospital when he read comics. From what I can tell, these two opponents are strong without a doubt. This system really wants me dead. As for beating them, that would be wishful thinking. They have an arsenal of magical abilities, some of which I forgot. Surviving is my go-to for now. Harold didn't plan on defeating the curses with this in mind. Instead, he would abuse his speed to avoid attacks and counter with the infinity ray or his punches. With that in mind, he slowly calmed down, but he still didn't trust the lottery anymore, not that he would not spin it. That curse was in the super rare section of the wheel, so it's not like my bad luck is so massive that it will land there again when I spin. Still, though it did me dirty, now I think is the best time to choose an evolution trait. With this, he opened the panel once again, but first he had to make sure nobody would interfere, so he opened the communicator and contacted Craig. Why? Because he had a good feeling the Viltrumites were more willing to obey him than Harold, especially since he disregarded their customs and law, forcefully placing himself in a leadership role. So Harold didn't let this stop him. Instead, he exploited the situation and planned on making Craig a loyal dog. General Craig, don't let anyone enter the council chambers, no matter what you hear or see. Don't bother asking me why, I won't tell you. He immediately cut the connection before explaining himself any further. This abrupt message made Craig frown and sigh a few seconds later. Options for biological traits. 1. Limitless physical potential. Your potential for strength and speed is now limitless and unbound by your genes or biology. You can grow strong to the point where you might as well crush planets with one hand and even further beyond. 2. Limited adaptation. You can adapt to a limited amount of environments, attacks and forms of energy, like magic, removing your weakness and vulnerability to these elements. 3. Energy assimilation. With this trait, you're now a cosmic conductor. With enough effort, you can assimilate with any type of energy, even chaos or void energy. The only downside is that you may only exert the energy physically. You cannot use it any other way, like magic attacks, but you can fuse the energy in your fists to increase power. That's weird. I literally made up my mind, but now that I look at the other options, I have a feeling I'll regret my choice while also being happy at the exact same time. System, will these options be permanently removed once I choose one? No, host, you can choose another trait every evolution stage with an evolution perk. How do I get more evolution perks? Evolution perks can be gained by completing tasks in the evolution section of the system. Harold nodded, then said, for my current problems, I'll take limited adaptations. That way I can adapt to many things, therefore making me improvise to them like magic. With this I won't have to be Afriod when I go to Marvel or DC. Hit me with it. As he said this, his body trembled as his skin began morphing and rearranging as if it were melting his body from the inside. 7 comments 0 vote. Orders. The pain lasted for 1 full hour as the evolution progressed smoothly. Hari suspected it would turn out to be more complicated and troublesome because evolution is often chaotic. Hopefully, his physical appearance wouldn't change. But he mostly endured the throughout process not because he could handle the excruciating pain, but because he knew when it was over he would have a powerful skill. Meanwhile, Eve ran her hand across the walls, feeling the material of the ship as they were on their way to her quarters. She was full of awe as this was her first time on a ship, still she wanted to calm herself down. She thought to herself that she had to represent Harold better by being more disciplined, and eventually they encountered across Anissa on the way. She looked at Eve with furrowed eyes, her gaze assessing the child thoroughly. "Who is this Barton?" she asked. Anissa wasn't inclined to believe it was a Viltrumite child, there weren't any everywhere they searched. The soldier accompanying Eve was a Viltrumite named Barton, a tall muscular man. He looked at Anissa, wondering why she even cared, but he had to answer. She is apparently protected by the Grand Regent as a person of significance. I've been ordered to accompany her to a room. Anissa wasn't satisfied with this answer and directly questioned the source of her interest, but to Barton it honestly seemed nosy of her. "Child, who are you and why does Harold protect you? Are you his child?" Barton didn't like how she called the Grand Regent by name, but ultimately he ignored it. He also couldn't help but wonder if this was Harold's child since they were sent out to reproduce with other species. But since she looked similar to them, it became even more peculiar because the only species that looked similar to them were humans in themselves. The possibility of it being with another Viltrumite was unlikely as they would have already known or found out. So Barton was inclined to believe Harold had a human child, because if it was with another Viltrumite, it would be known. Plus there's also the fact that he heard discussions among his peers from high command that the general went to Earth to seek Harold. So with that in mind his reasoning became more solid as to why this might also be a human who has yet to unlock her Viltrumite power. Little did they know Eve was something else completely, but they were right about her background. She was indeed from Earth and a human. Eve snapped out of her drifting mind to pay attention to the situation. She decided to answer Anissa's question. "I'm not Master's child, I'm merely a student learning his ways." She spoke shyly and reservedly, as this was her first time interacting with someone other than Harold, so she didn't know how to react. Anissa found her answer weird and uninformative, so she let it go, thinking of another idea. So, with that Anissa left, heading straight for the council chamber, while Barton took Eve away. With that, there were no longer interferences on their way there. Eve entered her room that was mostly white and silver. It had a simple bed in the corner that levitated without supports below. It also had a terminal across the desk that beeped silently. She gently dropped her saddle and looked around. Harold slumped and rested his back on the wall as the pain subsided. "That was intense, but with that out of the way I can achieve much more quickly." He said this as he heard a knock on the door. "I said nobody must disturb me." "Sir, we have arrived on Earth's moon. We are landing the ship if that's what you want." Harold heard Anissa's voice and decided to respond swiftly. "Come Inisty." The door automatically opened as she stepped in, and it closed behind her while she assessed what was going on, like why Harold was sitting on the floor instead of his big chair as a commander. Either way, she had to divulge what she had to say, so she stood at attention with her arms behind her back before she spoke. "Sir, what is your next command?" she asked. Harold stood up slowly, taking his time. He then walked to the large console in the center of the room. It displayed footage of Earth and a bunch of nonsense analysis about the planet. He breathed out a heavy breath as he rubbed his temples. "I can't stick around for too long because of that stupid curse. Anissa, inform Craig and Thula, including you, that we will head to Earth now. There's something that needs to be done while we're here," he finally said. She hesitantly nodded and turned around, but she paused as she remembered something. This made her turn around again to face Harold and ask, "Sir, is the child yours?" Harold was currently looking at the live footage of Earth when he heard the question, so he decided to look up at her slightly, saying, "What does that have to do with the orders I just gave you?" Hearing this, she looked down. She didn't like his answer, but obviously she would never voice that out. Sigh, she is someone of significance, you are to make sure nothing happens to her. Actually, come here. Harold sounded redundant right now, but he had to make his point clear as he spoke. As for his last words, Anissa slowly walked closer, but Harold urged her to stand next to him using hand gestures. 5 comments 0 vote, don't ask questions. Once she was close enough, right next to Harold, he placed his arm on her shoulder and asked quietly, "Anissa, what do you think of my vision for the future of our people?" She, on the other hand, became tense. Why did she have to stand so close in order to answer the question? It's not like anyone can hear inside the room, especially because it's soundproof. Battle plans were discussed here so no spy from outside the room can eavesdrop. She decided to answer as she didn't want to pause for too long. "Grand Regent, I agree with your vision, Armetho." "Wait, are you saying that because you're Afriod I won't like your answer?" "I do not fear such, sir." She quickly refuted, even surprising herself. "The way you explained things was somewhat compelling. I only hope you know what you're doing." Harold nodded as he thought, why do I not believe a word coming out of her mouth? Am I that paranoid, or maybe I'm onto something? "Good," Harold said as he removed his arm. This made her visibly relax, which Harold noticed. This made him shake his head in disappointment. "The last thing I want is to kill these people. They're so tense when I walk past. Is it because of my display of strength against Thragg?" He dismissed her promptly without paying her any mind. Instead, he got back to preparing for the future. Earth, such a vast beauty. If only these Viltrumites appreciated the landscapes instead of seeing places like these as breeding grounds. Haha, I'm one to talk, I'm no better. Comma 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 comma. Meanwhile, Anissa stood right outside the room she just exited by the side. She bit her lips as her gaze was completely in another world. Her legs were crossed as she slowly chuckled and stood there for 10 minutes straight. Once her imagination stopped holding her in a trance, she decided to begin walking in a direction. But if one looked closer, they would see a faint damp spot on her loincloth. Comma 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 comma. The preparations continued as the Viltrumites, in response to Harold's request, was ready to departure. So Harold too didn't waste any time and went ahead. They gathered together at the hangar airlock, with Harold at the lead and the others standing in front of him in a semicircle. "Okay, let me make things clear now, while we are still here. First, find me Nolan and bring me him along with his family. You are not to harm anyone in the process. If you do, I will throw you into the sun, and believe me, you won't get out. Second, do not draw too much attention to yourselves, and make it Cusick." With this said, they nodded in understanding as the airlock opened and Harold's coat began to slowly lift up, indicating that the hangar was now 0G. Harold was first to fly out while they followed him closely. From what he could tell, the GDA were probably monitoring them as they flew into the planet gently. Above all else, it was also clear to them that these people were related to Omni-Man, because when he first came here, that's the white uniform he wore. The peculiar one was the one wearing a red uniform with a red coat that had white fur on the crown. Nothing in their data could tell them who that was. Harold landed on a mountain, specifically on the summit of the mountain. He waited patiently as his subordinates went out to retrieve Nolan and his family. His instructions were followed to the T to say the least. They arrived at Nolan's house and landed in his backyard, and without an invitation, they walked through the sliding door. Debbie was enjoying her morning coffee while reading a newspaper before she dropped her mug in shock. 3 mysterious individuals stood in front of her with stern faces like they weren't here to play games. This made her think this was a burglary with the thieves cosplaying. As ridiculous as it looked, she was still frightened and paralyzed. Craig stepped forward, speaking first. "Where is your husband?" the man known as Nolan. Debbie, still in shock, wanted to scream, but it looked like she was choking. Fortunately, the burglars didn't try to steal anything and were waiting patiently for her to catch her breath. If it were up to Craig, he would have used his communicator to contact Nolan, but Harold prohibited it, giving a vague reason why. Still, he and the others didn't like how they had to use strain. Why not force the answers out of the inferior creature? That's what made them irritated while patiently waiting. Debbie on the other hand recovered and finally calmed down. "Who are you people? Why do you want my husband?" Thula was tempted to grab her immediately. This was because she was answering a question with a question, which pissed them off, but Harold's looming presence reminded them of clear instructions. Still, Debbie's demeanor wasn't something they wanted to tolerate. Craig stepped forward, prompting Debbie to step back, grabbing the kitchen knife. "You life is in no danger." Debbie frowned, saying, "Why did you hesitate before saying that? Just tell us where he is, Bug. Stop questioning us." Thula stepped forward, holding her pigtail tightly. Craig placed his arm in her path, signaling her to stop her attitude. Then Craig continued, "Your husband is a soldier of our empire. Our Grand Regent seeks his presence and he must answer to the call. It would help if you could call him, and tell him to come home." To be continued.